welcome to the show. Now, today is World Oceans Day, and I want to focus in particular oceans and the health, because there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on behind the scenes on looking at how oceans potentially could help in terms of health. And I'm joined now on the line by Lora Fleming, who is a physician and epidemiologist. She's also the professor and director of the European Centre for Environment and Human Health. But Lora has been looking at oceans and health for the last 2 decades or so. And I want to talk to her about how oceans could help our health in the future. Hello, Lora, you're very welcome to the show. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do in terms of oceans and how they can impact on our health?
So again, I am a physician epidemiologist, and my area of expertise is the interactions between our health and the health of the environment. And I'm particularly interested in that ecosystem of the ocean, the global ocean, our coasts, our seas. And what I wanted to say is, for me, it's a very hopeful area right now, given things like COVID-19, because the ocean can bring such benefit to our health and well-being, as well as having obviously significant risks. Starting just with the risk and touching on them lightly, there's the whole area of climate change, which is enacting for us right in front of our eyes. There's also issues of pollution, including plastics, but way beyond plastics. There's harmful algal blooms, etc. All those are risks to human health from the oceans. And by the way, a lot of them are risks caused by our human actions. But at the same time, the oceans bring huge benefits to us, not only in terms of things like livelihoods and seafood, in other words, protein food, omega-3 fatty acids, etc. But also, we've been doing a lot of research at the center where I work at the University of Exeter and with colleagues across Europe and around the world around how interacting with coasts can be really good for your mental health and physical well-being. And not just obviously coasts, but all blue spaces, green spaces as well. And I would say that COVID-19 has really put that on the map for all of us.
Tell me specifically, Lora, about what the oceans can do in terms of medicines or stuff that's in the oceans that could potentially be harnessed for our health.
So I'm not necessarily an expert in the whole area of marine biotechnology, but I work in a very interdisciplinary fashion with lots of different, both researchers, but also people who run companies, NGOs in this area. And the ocean is a source of a huge number of medicines and potential medicines for us, as well as sources of different types of food, particularly as we have problems feeding our populations around the world. So a couple of examples, there are chemotherapy drugs that have been developed from ocean sponges. The whole way we use the test for COVID-19 actually originated from the ocean. And also we're increasingly using ocean algae, for example, to develop other sources of protein, not only for us directly as humans, but also as animal feed, for example, in aquaculture.
That's amazing. And how long has that kind of work been going on for?
Well, again, not an expert, but at least 50 years. I mean, you could also argue that we've used things from the oceans for literally hundreds of years that were both medicinal and food. So it's been going on for a long time, but now it is actually being operationalized, usually under the umbrella of marine biotechnology.
And you have been the lead scientist on, if I'm right, an EU-funded project called SOPHIE, Seas, Oceans and Public Health in Europe. Tell me what that project has been about and really what its main findings have been.
So just a little bit of history. The whole area of oceans and human health is about bringing the marine community together with the public health and health community. And it started actually in the US back in the 1990s, and their big funding agencies, National Science Foundation and National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, funded a series of centers and research in that. And I actually was part of that. Then in about 10 years ago, I was lucky enough to come to Europe, and more recently, the European Marine Board and many other collaborators started a whole Oceans and Human Health program for Europe. And the SOPHIE project, funded by Horizons 2020, the wonderful European funding, has funded 8 different partners, including 3 SMEs research institutions and public health and marine institutions to lay the groundwork. What is out there on oceans and human health? What do we need to know? What is the evidence? And also to develop both a community that's interested in this around Europe and beyond, but also a strategic research agenda. Where do we go from here? Where are the gaps? And so we've literally accomplished all that. And now we are going to be presenting later in the day to the European Parliament, and we've been trying to get the word out there. So we have a lot to talk about in this space.
So can you give us an idea of some of the main findings?
Yes, in addition to things like the evidence, we looked at, is there evidence out there that human health is impacted both positively and negatively by the marine environment? And actually there's a lot of research gaps. For example, plastics, marine plastics, there's actually almost no data how it directly impacts on human health. For good reason, that research is just starting. But we also, in our strategic research agenda, identified 3 areas. We used both public and stakeholders and experts to input into this. And the 3 areas that we identified, one was healthy seafood, healthy people, or sustainable seafood, healthy people, actually. We also identified marine biotechnology, biodiversity, and medicines, and then healthy people, healthy coasts, sustainable coasts. Through all these 3 areas, these are areas where marine and human health people can work together to really make a difference. They also bring in areas such as equity of access, sustainability, and the potential for innovation as well. So we hope that those 3 areas will be funded in the future to really bring oceans and human health forward as an area, a meta-discipline of research and training.
So what would you expect to see then come from that? If you have those synergies being created and then they're developing, you know, some technologies or some medical health things that we may need?
So in my experience, the more you involve multiple scientific disciplines, but also the more you interact with affected communities, stakeholders, businesses, policymakers, our vision for this type of research is to really interact with people in Europe and beyond, to identify locally, regionally, what are the issues that they want to study in those 3 spaces. And then to create exemplars, start innovation projects. It's not just about research that identifies problems, it's also about finding solutions, finding exemplars. So for example, one of the projects we did in Sophie is we actually went all around Europe. This was done by the Deltaris Marine Institute in the Netherlands, and identified projects where citizen science is working in both the marine and the human health and well-being space. And so that's an example, those are exemplars of the kind of thing we could be doing together as citizens and researchers and experts to really take forward an agenda where we live sustainably with the ocean, but in a way that's both good for our health and the health of the ocean.
Now, I know Ireland has played a role in Sophie, and you've had Irish people involved in it. And of course, there's the Irish Marine Institute as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about that Irish involvement?
Well, Ireland has definitely been a leader in this area even before the Sophie project. Thanks to people like Laura Burke and her colleagues, both in in the Environmental Protection Agency, but also in your public health group. Also at Newark, that university was a partner in Sophie, or is a partner in Sophie. And also the Marine Institute has been a real leader and is pushing the agenda of oceans and human health at the European level as well as within Ireland. And it's very exciting. I also think that you have exemplars of how people have benefited from the ocean, both coastally and the larger global ocean, for literally thousands of years in Ireland. It's a people that is to a certain extent at one with the sea. So you are an exemplar, I think, for Europe. And you also have an increasing number of biotechnology and other small businesses and larger businesses and innovation that I think are leading the way in terms of trying to find out things like, are there medicines that we can sustainably create from the seas? Are there alternatives to the food systems that we currently have?
I have chaired a few debates on issues connected with the oceans. But one of the topics that comes up over and over again, Laura, is to what extent should we be careful in terms of policing now the various harvesting that might be going on and trawling through the oceans, and that we wouldn't see the oceans being devastated now because there are business interests in maybe finding out what's there and making commercial businesses out of them.
So one of the reasons I'm so invested in the area of oceans and human health is I think it puts in front and center that whatever we do to the oceans ultimately will knock back on our health. So we need to both monitor in an ongoing fashion and keep evaluating what our actions are, whether they are harvesting fish or looking for that special marine sponge that may have a chemotherapy drug, or using certain types of fish as models for human disease, or even us using the coast, for example, for exercise and recreation, blue tourism. I think we have to keep in front and center that anything we do will have impacts on the ocean and its health. And in the long run, that will impact our health. And I'll just say things like ocean plastic is a classic example where we just didn't really think about it. And there's a whole lot of plastic now out there that's impacting on our health and the health of the ocean. So I think there's this piece of realizing that we are interconnected, and hopefully that will make us care about the health of the ocean as much as we care about our own health.
And it's been devastating finding out just how badly polluted the oceans are from plastic waste. Is it possible to clean up the oceans and get rid of that horrendous waste, plastic waste that's in them?
So for particularly Monaco is actually going to be releasing a report later this year. Prince Albert and colleagues in the US, Professor Phil Landrigan and the Lancet Commission, around the whole larger issue of chemical pollution in the oceans. And I think it's been a largely hidden issue. People see plastics, but it's really the tip of the iceberg. Having said that, we now have examples, which hopefully are not being rolled back by certain administrations, of how we can clean up chemical pollution. Air pollution, for example, water pollution, just in the US, where I am also a resident, has significantly improved in the last 20 years, as it has in Europe. Microbial pollution, poop in the water, has significantly improved in both the US and in Europe. And we have the data because we have ongoing monitoring programs to show that. So for me, that's extremely hopeful. Having said that, the big issue with the ocean is that so much of it is hidden from us. So that actually monitoring it, knowing the full extent of this pollution, is an ongoing process. And I think it's something we've got to be really aware of, particularly since, for example, the European Union, as part of its blue growth policy, is really pushing the idea of exploring mining under the seas. We need to be very careful about that and learn lessons from what we've learned on land in terms of mining, so that we don't end up polluting the oceans even more than they are already.
One final question to you, Laura, because you mentioned COVID-19, and of course, we're all looking at potentially how this lockdown actually has been better for the environment. Is there any sort of immediate evidence right now, I know it's only a short period of time in terms of gathering scientific evidence, to suggest that actually this pandemic has been a good thing for the oceans?
I think it's still a mixed picture, and we're still looking at this. All of us are looking at it. I know you've probably been looking at it as well. I will flag one issue. For the first time, the majority of the populations in Europe are actually realizing that blue and green spaces, and high quality blue and green spaces, and access for everyone to blue and green spaces, is essential to our mental health and well-being. And that is thanks to the COVID-19 lockdowns. I think this will have huge impacts on how we envision our cities in the future, how we think about our protected areas, such as marine protected areas. And I hope that this will make us value our natural resources, particularly the ocean in my case, going forward.